a lot of times we talk about the dangers of the American culture and we don't talk about the positive aspects of the American culture. The American culture, alhamdulillah, we can come here, I can sit there and say Obama is the Antichrist. Or I can say that he's a terrorist, right? And I don't have to worry about the Secret Service coming down here and arresting me and maybe putting me to death. But if I went to some Muslim countries and I said something about their leader, what might happen? That. But that's not Islamic. I do have to make that as a point. There's a famous scholar of Islam. His name is Jamal al-Afghani. And I use this because it's got my name, inshallah. No, I have his name actually, inshallah. But anyhow, he was very well known in the 1800s. And he made a famous statement. He said, I've been to the West and I see Islam in the West, but I don't see any Muslims. And I've been to the Muslim countries and I see Islam, but I don't see the Muslims. SubhanAllah. And that's where we're living at today. I see some non-Muslims in that are doing the work that we should be doing, leading by the example that we should be doing. So the only way that we can go forward with this is to learn from what they're doing correctly, take the good from it, and reject the bad. So take from the examples on how they're doing charity. Take from the examples how they're organizing around certain things in order to get something accomplished. Take these examples and utilize them for the good of our community, right? So these parts of American culture are good. And so we need to go ahead and adapt and take the good parts of the culture and leave the bad parts. So I'll hit on just a small part of the dangers of this culture. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says in the Quran, he says, do not follow the footsteps of the shaitan. This environment is full of footsteps of shaitan. Not just for Muslims, but for non-Muslims too. And that's why the non-Muslim parents, they spend all of their time, all of their money. They both work full-time jobs, right? They put them in daycare, they put them in school, they put them in basketball, football, baseball. I mean, they keep them so busy in that to try to keep them out of trouble, right? But what happens to most of these kids because of the culture? They still fall into that footstep of shaitan, right? Some of them go to alcohol, some of them go to drugs, some of them chase after women, some of them they go through these vices that as human beings, shaitan is trying to get us away from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, we at least have Islam. We have this reminder, the Quran, that can help and guide us and be that beacon that we need. But we also have to teach our children what these dangers are. One of the biggest dangers I see for our Muslim youth is their friends. The Prophet ﷺ, he said that a good friend is like the perfume seller. Even if you don't buy any perfume, you get a benefit from it because you smell the beautiful smell that comes from it. And he said the bad friend is like the blacksmith. Even if you don't go anywhere near the shop, just because it's in the air, you're going to get dirty. And that's what we're dealing with some of our friends. You know, there's an old American saying that said, birds of a feather flock together, right? So there's one time Omar bin Khattab, he was the caliphate, and you know, Omar, he used to love alcohol, right? In fact, he used to make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make alcohol halal. Subhanallah. That's how much his qalb was attached to alcohol. In fact, one time he prayed salat and he did 11 rak'ah, the salat, and everyone's following behind him, and he was drunk. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he revealed an ayat in Quran. It says, do not approach your prayers in a befogged state of mind, right? So when he gave up alcohol, he really gave up alcohol, right? He said, no more, I'm not going to touch it again. So one day, you know, alcohol had been prohibited. And so he's walking through the market and he came across a bunch of the Arabs that were drinking alcohol, right? And there was a man that was sitting among them and he was fasting. He said, why are you here with them? He said, but yeah, Amir al-Mu'mineen, I wasn't drinking nothing, I'm fasting. He ordered the Sahaba to start beating him first. Now why would he say beat him first? Why start with him, the one that was fasting? Yes.
You should know better.
You should know better. And also, even if you weren't doing that, what might people say? You're a part of that, right? If you're hanging around people that are smoking weed, if you're hanging around people that are smoking cigarettes, if you're hanging around people that are drinking alcohol, if you're hanging around these bad apples, what ends up happening is you're going to start getting dirty, right? Like the blacksmith, right? And eventually, you may become weaker and weaker and weaker until what happens? You become like them. And that's, unfortunately, that's what's happening to some of our youth. They don't start off that way, right? It goes through phases, right? And a lot of times it's because of their friends. So, our friends, we need to make sure that we check our friends on who we have as our friends. And I love the chapter in the Quran about Luqman. Luqman, very wise man. And he said, Ya Bunayya, oh my son. He said, when you come to a gathering, sit down and be quiet and just listen. If they mention about Allah, join them. If they mention about anything else, leave them. Very beautiful advice on how we pick our friends. Because if we follow just this one simple aspect, we don't have to worry about friends. You'll always be around people that are always reminding you of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a beautiful thing. Beautiful advice from a wonderful man. So, I don't want to talk about all negative, like our children, they have no hope in this environment. Because there's lots of hope. But there's also lots of challenges that we're going to have going in the road ahead. The hope is that Islam is going to be revived by the youth. It's always, throughout its whole entire history, it's been a youth movement. We can look at many examples in the Quran from Surah Al-Kahf, for example, the youth that took themselves into the cave. They lived during a time of great strife. There are many other different examples that we could talk about the youth in Islam and how they revived the Ummah. And this is what will happen. We have a beautiful example here in the United States because we have a lot of youth in that have been exposed to this whole concept of forbidding what is wrong and promoting what is right. Because this is part of American doctrine. In fact, that's what this country was founded on. Unfortunately, some of its citizens have forgotten this. But we as Muslims, we have this as part of our doctrine, right? The true mu'minun, what do? They stand up for what is right and they forbid what is wrong. So we have a lot of young youth today that they're out there and they're there for their brothers in Palestine. They're there for if something happens to the Muslims in Burma. They're out there protesting. I mean, mashallah. And they're out there standing with Jews, Christians, with other people that want to stand for what is right. In fact, that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He created us for. As a Khalifa, to take care of all of this stuff. And so our youth, they show us this. They show us this vitality. They show us this vision. But they need our guidance. They need our leadership. And sometimes they don't want to hear that. And sometimes we don't want to hear advice from them. We have to meet in between, in the road, in the middle. So I think the solution is working on networks of communication. How do we open up the communication between the elders and the youth and work through these cultural differences? So for example, if my youth is raised in the American culture and they've adapted American cultural values, how do we work together to make sure that they have Islamic morals and values on top of their culture? So taking Islam and putting it in the front seat of the car and putting culture, nationality, and putting it all in the back seat. Because the important thing is what? Islam, right? Nothing else matters. At the end of the day, I think every single parent in here and every single human being in here, we want our kids to die on Islam, right? We don't want them on some other way. We want to make sure that they're being good for the people. And we want to make sure that they're the light that is helping guide people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.